3 drops of water does not a bucket fill. 3 drops of water does not a bucket fill. This bill that they passed in Washington has several relief funds for certain groups and certain functions in this state. It is 3 drops of water in a bucket, and the bucket is empty, and the bucket is called a $15 billion state deficit. So it's almost inconsequential. We have a $15 billion deficit. Well, I gave you X for this, and X for this, and X for this. Okay, now we have a $14.5 billion deficit. So what we need to do in terms of rent relief and small business relief and lost revenue from COVID and expenses of COVID vaccination process, this federal government's bill does virtually nothing for us. And the big fight on this bill, where Washington failed, was what was called state and local funding. They dropped that from the bill. And that's what would have provided economic relief to the states and local governments on a meaningful level. So this is all but insignificant, these small grants that they're making, and it comes nowhere near to addressing any of the needs that we're facing or the people of this state are facing. You know, it's a cruel irony that they say, well, we're giving New York State X for rent relief and Y for small businesses, and we're giving this to the schools. They make it sound like they accomplished something. They accomplished nothing. When you compare that to the need, it's telling a starving family, well, I gave you 2 pieces of bread. Yeah, thank you very much. Next question, operator.
Thank you, Governor. You now have Terry Weaver of the Post-Standard. Terry, your line is now open. Please unmute your microphone.
Hi, Governor.
Terry Weaver, how are you?
I'm doing well, thank you.
Good to hear your voice.
So I wanted to ask about the positivity rates in the zones across the state. I know that you have changed the metrics for those, adding hospitalizations and other things, but we're still also using positivity rate to determine those zones, but we haven't seen that positivity rate zone by zone in a few days. I was wondering why the state stopped releasing that, and if you could start releasing it again.
Yeah, I think maybe they just took a couple of days off over Christmas. And Scrooge, I'm not. Well, it depends on who you ask, Terry. Do you know Gareth?
Yes. Hey, Terry. We'll be adding this. We have a website that has all the different zones on there. And if we haven't already, we'll be adding those numbers to that website and updates on a daily basis so you can see it there.
I think that means Gareth took Christmas off. Did you take Christmas off?
If the website is updated, then I did not. If it's not, then I did.
It'll be updated, Terry. We did provide the numbers in this by region just
yes, we have it by region. I think Terry's asking for those specific microcluster zones, and that should be on our website, and if it's not, I'll make sure it's updated.
Okay. Next question, operator.
Governor, you now have Lisa Colangelo of Newsday. Lisa, please unmute your microphone.
Hi, how are you?
Lisa Colangelo, how are you?
Very good, thank you. I was wondering if you had any other reports of fraud involving the vaccine in the state, with any other providers. Have you received any information on that?
Besides Newsday? Kidding. That is the only case that we're at liberty to speak about now. But Lisa, as I said before, whenever you have a valuable commodity that is being dispensed, you should expect fraud, right? It's a function of the marketplace. It's a function of demand. It's a function of human nature. As I mentioned, I was Attorney General before this. I was an assistant district attorney at one time. If you have a valuable commodity, and you're dealing, by the way, with hundreds of provider organizations, you can't dispense this as quickly as we're trying to dispense it to 20 million people without involving hundreds of organizations and thousands of personnel, right? I mean, just think about this. You're going to have doctors and nurses and pharmacists and health aides who have access to thousands and thousands of vials of this vaccine. You should expect that, the old expression, that some of those vials are going to walk, right? It's the old colloquial expression. They're going to walk. They're going to develop legs and walk away in the dark of night. And that's the situation that we're dealing with. So we are hyper cautious, hyper vigilant. We're putting in the strictest penalties in the country, the best we can determine. I'm making it clear that I understand the value of a vial. You know, one vial, and you saw how small a vial is, some of those vials can do 10 vaccines. You could sell that one vial. So I understand the temptation. I understand human nature in the market. You will be penalized. You will lose your license. You can go to jail. So think about that also. And in this kind of situation, where that vial would then be administered to 10 people, people talk. To stick with another old colloquial truism, people talk. And you won't get away with it. And it's not worth the risk. So we are, unfortunately, experienced with human nature and with fraud. So we have the penalties in place, we have the safeguards in place. But when you're dealing with thousands of people and hundreds of organizations and a valuable commodity, expect a level of fraud. We had this conversation when we were talking about the unemployment benefits and how fast we were getting out the unemployment benefits. And the provocative questions would be, well, there are a lot of people waiting for the unemployment benefits. Get them out fast. Why aren't you getting them out fast? You're slow. You're hurting people. You're demonic. I said, yeah, but the flip side is there will be fraud. And if we don't certify people and if we don't make sure they're eligible, what's going to happen, as sure as night follows day, is you're going to have people who defrauded the government. And then you're going to come back the other way and say, taxpayers were defrauded. How did you do that? How did you let it happen? And by the way, that's exactly what has happened. You're going to see the same function with this vaccine. We're working very hard to get it out quickly. You will see organizations and people who take advantage of the situation, and we are prepared for that. Next question, operator.
Thank you, Governor. You now have Sasha Pezenik from ABC News. Sasha, your line is now open. Please unmute your microphone.
Thank you, Governor, for taking my question. It's in regards to Park Care, a couple fronts here. How many individuals are we looking at being charged in this investigation so far? And then number two, the Moderna vaccine is a 2-dose vaccine. So how are we going to ensure that those individuals, I believe it's about 869, who received this dose through Park Care are going to be able to get their second doses? Thank you.
Sasha, it's an ongoing investigation, so I don't want to say too much about it. But fraud can happen on two levels here, right? The organization can be involved in fraud. Well, I'll give you three levels. I'm really going back to my Attorney General days. The organization can be involved in fraud. Individuals employed by the organization can be involved in fraud. And recipients of the vaccine can be involved in fraud, right? Or they could have been defrauded. But these are all questions of fact. So if you received the vaccine and you knew you weren't supposed to receive the vaccine, and that was a fraudulent act by you, that's one situation. If you were eligible and you had no idea that this was a fraudulent organization, that would be a different situation. But it's going to be a question of fact, Sasha. And I don't know any facts at this time that I would convey that wouldn't compromise the investigation unless Dr. Zucker does or Melissa knows.
Nothing here, but the public health always is a priority, so we want to be sure that people do get vaccinated and get their doses. But as we said, looking into the investigation, so there's two sides. There's the investigation side, and then there's the public health side, and we will always do what's best for the public health as well.
If the individuals involved were not participants of the fraud, but victims of the fraud, then it makes it even easier. But let's get the facts first, right? Okay, one more question, operator.
Thank you, Governor, for your last question. You now have Carl Campanile of the New York Post. Carl, your line is now open. Please unmute your microphone.
Greetings. How you doing, Governor?
Hey, Carl. Merry Christmas. Happy New Year.
Merry Christmas. Happy New Year to you and yours. A follow-up question on park care. You said before, I just want to see if you clarify, are you looking at any other firms that may have acted improperly here in terms of obtaining or distributing the vaccine? Or is it just park care at this time?
Let me say it this way, Carl, because we've had this type of conversation many times in the past, again, going back to the Attorney General days. The only organization that we are looking at for possible criminal activity at this point is the organization you mentioned. The Department of Health is constantly, and the New York State Inspector General is constantly, and the Attorney General's office is constantly looking at organizations and looking at the distribution system. But the only organization that is being investigated for criminal fraud at this time is the organization you mentioned. Happy New Year, everyone. I was talking to you before then, but Happy New Year.